Welcome everybody here. Welcome everybody streaming away. This is the Secrets of Supper, and today we're going to talk about how your dinner table is actually a medicine cabinet. This is one of my favorite cartoons from the New Yorker. We want to talk about the traditional and widespread belief that food will cure all your ills, that it serves as what we now call medicine. In the early times, medicine used to be referred to, maybe you remember, as a potion, which meant it was a combination of ingredients, like a love potion that might activate somebody's heart. And you may have seen witches stirring potions, which were actually cooks making food that was medicinal. And maybe a specific amount of each ingredient in that potion was smashed up with the kitchen mortar and pestle. Today's medicine, believe it or not, is still a combination of ingredients, but they have been crushed into a pill where you cannot identify them. Nevertheless, note the symbol on your local pharmacy. The pill seller, it is a mortar and pestle. Someone who offers medicine as food that is not disguised in another form like pills, we would call an herbalist. An herbalist or a homeopath who does that today might be thought of as alternative medicine. But plain food is the original medicine, and it was the go-to cure for healing, and it is still very much used today. And if you see that RX on the other side, do you know what the X, like in Xmas? It's taking out a syllable of the word. Anybody know what's been removed by that X? The word recipe. Oh. Pharmacist doesn't want you to know they're working off a recipe, just like any home cook. So we get the X. Perhaps you've had an experience of checking into a spa, hoping that checking out, you're going to feel better, stronger, look more beautiful. And you check in and you give them your health history. You tell them about your aches and pains. And what do? They assign you a specific diet for your stay. And this idea comes to us from Chinese, Indian, Greek, and Arabic medicine, which the Crusaders discovered when they attacked the Holy Land and found themselves injured and relying on Greek and Arabic doctors. The Crusaders were so impressed by the diet cures these doctors put them on that they brought them back to Europe and established what they called the first public places of healing. And it was based on that simple proposition, no less appealing to you and me now, that it's absolutely possible to look younger and live longer on the right diet. Have you heard that before? The Crusaders brought that to the Western world from the Greek and Arabic doctors. And what they did back then in the 12th century is not far-fetched from what we are doing today, because we are still going to spas, to feel restored, to feel more healthy, to feel stronger. And the most famous American spa, which was the first one in the United States, was run by a cosmetics queen who was making you more beautiful, and that was Elizabeth Arden. And do you know what her first spa was called and where it was? Mm-hmm. It was here in the great state of Maine, and it was called Maine Chance. It was in Mount Vernon on one of the Belgrade lakes. And today there are still Maine Chance spas elsewhere. Essentially, this spa mimicked exactly what the Crusaders brought back from the Holy Land. And it was so successful that even though the Mount Vernon property, as I said, is no longer a spa, there are Maine Chance spas across the country and in Mexico. And today, what was Main Chance is actually a spa for rehabilitating veterans of the recent wars. So as far back as recorded history, certain edibles were, and we are still using them to serve as a specific remedy for a particular body problem. So let's look at rhubarb, for example. It is a plant native to very cold Mongolia and northern China. Now it's imported and it actually flourishes here in cold Maine. Trial and error must have taught the early humans that those roots and leaves of this pretty pink herb we treat like fruit were deadly. Because now we know that the roots and leaves are poisonous to human beings, but we also know the stems are just fine. So somebody had to figure that out. In fact, eating these stems can refresh you. And so we call them a tonic in the spring. And so today when you buy rhubarb, you're only getting those stems. And yet the early Chinese also figured out, okay, that root is poisonous, but we could use it as medicine. And that poison became an emetic. If you had upset stomach or troubles, they could get it out of your stomach, whatever was troubling you, with a little dose of rhubarb root. And so for millennia, people have ground up rhubarb root and used it in tiny doses as a cure for digestive and constipation problems. It did not take long for human beings to appreciate the energy that comes from drinking coffee or tea, right? And so are you not self-medicating every morning with your first cup of coffee that jolts you awake? Are we all not self-medicating with caffeine? Are some elderly people not self-medicating when they deliberately eat prunes or drink prune juice? What about those of us drinking cranberry juice to combat a urinary tract infection or prevent one? Have you ever been told, anybody, to eat more carrots to strengthen your weak eyes because of the vitamin A in the carrots? And here's something you probably have known since you were a child. Ginger quells nausea. And how many of us woke from an anesthetic in a hospital or dental office and were given ginger ale to counteract the nausea from the anesthetic? And how many of us have chewed on ginger on a boat to prevent getting seasick? The Chinese figured all this out millennia ago, that ginger is a miracle drug. And in fact, about 2 years ago, after I had some surgery, I was invited to grate it up and pour boiling water over it, and then dip in a towel and use this as a poultice. It was guaranteed to help. And of course, what about your grandmothers? Remember your grandmother's advice, starve a fever, but feed a cold? Or that great faith in chicken soup? It's going to cure you, right? Well, science has now discovered this is not blind faith. Chicken soup does do something that heals the body. They're not really sure what, but they're working on it. And it is a cure. Probably the major use we have now, we talk about spring tonic foods that restore you, but the major use for all of us of the word tonic goes with the word gin. And so let's look for a moment at what were the British doing in India when they made tonic water to go with their gin? Do you see what is in tonic water? Tonic water is quinine. And what does quinine do? It prevents malaria. And so if you are in India full of mosquitoes and other bugs, and you are drinking quinine, you are being prophylactic against malaria. So the Brits put it in their gin, and you and I today in Maine are still having gin and tonic on July 4th, even if we don't have that many mosquitoes and have to worry about malaria. Now, if you think all this is kind of esoteric and really primitive and goes back in time and has nothing to do with us in the iPhone age, go to Walgreens or CVS. Even go to the natural food store on Center Street or Morning Glory in Brunswick, and just look at what's on those shelves. A star is showing you the shelves closest to the prescription window. Always rows of jars that have ground up cayenne, cinnamon, ginger, garlic, turmeric, fenugreek, cranberry, pomegranate, papaya, elderberry, acai berry, soy, fish oil, green tea, and artichoke, just to name a few, as they say. And there it is, your kitchen in the pharmacy. And you can also browse any one of dozens of current magazines out there and read all about the latest diet for your good health, or what we now call wellness. A paleo diet, a keto, a pescatarian, a macrobiotic diet, a vegan diet, no carb, high carb, no fat, and on and on and on. Because everybody says eating certain foods will make you healthier, prettier, stronger. And health is now called wellness, and it comes attached to many fads, right? So just to prove again, this is nothing antiquated, alive and well right here, probably even in Hannah's library. Here are some of the local titles you can take out from your local library. And I only picked 3 of the dozens. I'm sure Hannah can list what's all these books you can find. So we are still talking about eating and health and food as medicine. Health food fads are a very long-standing American tradition. We are all old enough, I think, to suspect remember what used to be called health food stores? Now they're natural food stores, but they were health food stores. Well, even before the mid-20th century phenomena of health food stores that gave us Whole Foods, natural and organic stores like the Portland Co-op and Morning Glory, we had a triumvirate of so-called health nuts at the time, our diet more medicinal. 3 men who way before the hippies were railing against industrially processed food as bad for your health. And these 3 men are very well known to all of us. The minister Sylvester Graham, Dr. John Kellogg, and the bodybuilder Bernard McFadden. So let's look at these things. If you have graham crackers or graham cracker crumbs in your pantry, that's because Sylvester Graham in the early 19th century decided that processed white flour, and this was before today's science, was bad for your body and vegetarianism was good. And he preached that. And while he did, he was tinkering and he invented his own form of a whole wheat flour. And that is still sold today right down the street in brackets as Graham flour with a capital G for Sylvester Graham. It's a dark flour and it is the source of those packaged crackers that also carry his name, Graham crackers. And they were devised to go with your vegetarian meal because it was the fiber that was going to help your meal exit your gut. And then we have John Harvey Kellogg, who was a Midwestern doctor who became so interested in healthy food, or what we now call health food, near the turn of the 20th century. So this is after Sylvester Graham. He started a sanitarium in Battle Creek, Michigan, which was a replica of the original ones those returning crusaders from the Middle East brought back and established in Salerno, Italy, to treat people's ills using only diet and rest. John Kellogg was a Seventh-day Adventist and who, like other followers of Ellen White's religion, believed in vegetarianism. This Battle Creek, Michigan first center of what was called wellness, with its emphasis on a vegetarian diet, became very famous and very fashionable for the elite of this country, who served as what we would now call influencers. Dr. Kellogg's brother, Will, was the great marketer, the great entrepreneur, who made his brother's name world famous. Not exactly because of that spa, but because of their inventing a way to flatten and bake corn kernels to make them easier for your body to digest. And those flattened corn kernels they invented are what's lurking in your box of Kellogg's Corn Flakes. And the third food fanatic, you might say, was a man obsessed with bodybuilding and body health long before Arnold Schwarzenegger. And that was Bernard McFadden, who changed his name to Bernard without the D and an R, extra R, just for the effect. And he formulated theories of exercise and diet that would build the ideal body. And then he propagated these through what became a magazine empire known as McFadden Bartell Publications. In one of his magazines, which was called Physical Culture, he promoted a raw diet, only a raw diet, 100 years before the latest ones. You only ate raw, unprocessed fruits and vegetables and nuts, and that was going to cure whatever was wrong with you. McFadden claimed he had cured his own TB with these changes to his dinner plate. And he advocated starting every day by drinking a huge cup of boiling water laced with fresh lemon to cleanse your system. And then you had to walk 10 miles before lunch. And I want to tell you that my grandfather did both of those things religiously. And I did not, and he used to talk about Bernard McFadden. McFadden Bartell Publications was still alive and well in the 1960s and 70s, but it was no longer about physical culture and bodybuilding. It was for movie star and fan magazines that were supposed to make you shape up and chip up to look like them. And during the day of these men, there were many attempts to smear them as kooks and nut jobs. But as you probably know, they were followed in our time by more. Dr. Pritkin, Dr. Atkins, Dr. Ornish, Dr. Phil, all telling us how to eat for my health. And they were followed by spa diets and Weight Watchers and wellness centers and Gwyneth Paltrow. Health food stores are now called natural food stores, but you can still walk down the aisle of your local supermarket and find graham crackers, Kellogg's Corn Flakes, and microwaved popcorn, which was another thing, but was a health food that was also promoted by Dr. Kellogg before it was slathered in fake butter and salt by Orville Redenbacher. Then back in the late 1970s, there were lots of earnest hippies, and you may have heard the word macrobiotic. It was another new diet craze, and it was here in Maine. And it was from a Japanese guru, Michio Kushi, who just happened to have a popular institute close to us. It was in Boston. And I went to a talk. I was a reporter in the mid-70s that his lieutenant came to Maine and he gave in Belfast. It was in a church basement. And it was just after we had the beef boycott. And there was all this confusion about whether you should or shouldn't eat red meat and cholesterol and heart attacks after lots of food health headlines. And people were very confused. And there were about 25 people in this church basement in Belfast, including in the front row, the late Dr. Spock, who had had a bout of cancer. And at the start of this evening's event, the speaker asked for a show of hands. How many of you have suffered some form of cancer in the last 5 years? And more than half the hands went up. And as a reporter, I was sitting in the back, so I could see the whole room. And that's how I saw it, if you're gonna ask. And then he asked, how many of you stopped eating red meat? And the same hands went up. And then he said, okay, now when you stopped eating red meat, how many of you started eating chicken? And the same hands went up. And finally he said, and how many of you are now eating chicken at least 4 to 5 times a week so you don't eat red meat? And there were the same hands going up. And of the cancers, he said, how many of you have had some form of melanoma? And there were the hands, including Dr. Spock. And so Michio Kushi's lieutenant then explained to the people in the room how cancer can be caused if it isn't genetic. What we eat breaks down in our body through the digestive process into chemicals, many chemicals, minerals, and small particles. And these get dispersed where they best belong if everything is flowing right. When, however, your digestive system is overwhelmed by the same chemicals and particles over and over and over again, you have a dam that builds up, and it cannot get rid of this dam fast enough, and stuff backs up behind it. And so these chemicals turn toxic where they are, and those toxins become the cancer that destroys your healthy cells. The moral of his story that night to those chicken eaters was, you cannot eat the same food over and over again. It will throw your whole system out of balance. And when you're out of balance, that is dis-ease. So I bring you that from that snowy night in Belfast Church in January. So the health food branch of our American culture, starting with Sylvester Graham, led eventually in the 60s and 70s to the hippie movement, the organic farming movement, more diet books, food magazines, blogs, fads, spas, body shaming, and now influencers, more than anybody can count. And then we have the food writer Michael Pollan, whose now famous dictum that started a whole new conversation about food. You've heard this: eat food, not too much, mostly plants. And then we have the famous cookbook author, Mark Bittman, saying vegan before 6 to restore your health. There is a more recent book by Dr. Robert Lustig, who for decades was at the University of San Francisco, California's powerful medical campus. And he wrote this book because he needed to take modern medicine to task for ignoring nutrition as a main determinant of his patient's health. Using decades of data from his own and other people's work, Dr. Lustig shows how simply eating non-processed food, which is no simple task, he admits, in our society, it can keep you doctor and pill-free for decades. He called his book, and you can find it here in the library, Metabolical, a combination of the words metabolic and diabolical, because as he explains in the beginning, what passes for official nutrition in our country as espoused by licensed dietitians is essentially being funded by the huge processed food conglomerates and soda manufacturers and sugar companies whose profits are feeding the medical industrial complex that is supposed to cure you from the harm of their foods. And that's why he calls it metabolical. So the idea of using your food as your medicine is very much alive right now all over this country, which is what I hope you will leave with and understand. I may have talked before about salt, which is a vital nutrient. Our body is 90% water, and we need to retain that water. And that is why I explained last week, we subconsciously eat a lot of salty foods in summertime when we are sweating and dehydrating. We are self-medicating every time we pile on those potato chips in July. It's okay. We need iodine to avoid goiter and other thyroid problems. And now we all know that eating seaweed and ocean fish and certain foods will provide enough iodine to do that job. Rock salt does not contain iodine. And if you use it exclusively, like fashionable Himalayan pink or black or white salt, it is going to be a threat to your own health, something I actually experienced a few years back when I decided to get rid of that blue canister of Morton salt and eat all this fancy salts that were out there. And a lot of other people did that. And we had a public health crisis of people starting to have thyroid issues. And so that's why there has been a worldwide effort to keep iodized salt in every pantry in the world. Every country mandates iodized salt. And it was the original start of what we call public health. And so you are best advised, you can put the fancy salt on your dinner table, but put the iodized salt in your cooking. But make sure you are getting iodized salt in your body. One of the humans, our greatest hazards from time immemorial has been, of course, bacteria, the bad bacteria. It debilitates and it can kill you. So we have always been on the lookout for whatever might destroy or detain that bad bacteria. And we know our ancestors used and still use salt to stop bacteria from spreading in fish and in meat, right? We hang it out to dry and we salt it, which drains all the moisture from them. And in that dry environment, the bacteria can no longer live. We also know the ancient Egyptians used salt to disinfect and dry out wounds on this same principle, that when you remove all the liquid and everything is dry, you have no medium for bacteria to spread. And so salt in your body, which we need, can help prevent bad bacteria from taking over. And that's why people tell you don't eat any salt at all. They're not giving you good medical advice. And we also know that early people figured out boiling water to a certain degree will make it safe to drink. And we know that the discovery of fermented beverages, which created alcohol, was an even better, safer drink. And that was a revolution in being able to drink. Why? Because alcohol kills bacteria. And so it was a form of medicating in the days before refrigeration and freezers, and you never knew if the food you were eating was fresh or poison. But if you had a little bit of alcohol in there killing the bacteria, you had a better chance. It happened to me in 1970. I went to Tunisia and hooked up with a small group of French people. We were riding around in the desert in a van. And in the front of the van was a little cooler that had soda cans and some bottles of white wine because they were French. And in the back, among our totes and backpacks, the French had a few bottles of red wine. And we spent our second night somewhere under a palm tree in the middle of the Sahara Desert. We rode on camels into this oasis, and the native Berbers were roasting a lamb on a spit. That was our dinner. There they were. And we were to sleep out under the stars. Essentially, we were laying on the sand, just like the Berbers were. And all I remember is that I woke up in a hospital 36 hours later with a doctor and my new French friend hovering over me. And I was running a high fever and I had massive intestinal damage. And everybody else, all the French were just fine. And the doctor said, "You're going to be fine in a few days. There's a lot of antibiotics." And when he left, my new French friend looked at me and she said, "Alors, my American friend, you were drinking Coca-Cola, but we are French and we were drinking wine, so we are fine. Alcohol kills bacteria. Don't forget that." And I have never forgotten it since. And I am the only one I know who has never gotten sick on any bizarre trips to places like Mongolia and Bhutan and Rio and other places, because I do that. Since that I drink the alcoholic beverages, which I don't normally do at home. In Asia, it's beer right out of the bottle for extra safety. I have seen people ask for a glass and that glass still has dirty water on it, polluted water that it was washed in, and I've seen people get sick. And in 1988, I drank beer every lunch and dinner for 2 weeks in India with a group of people from Maine, and I was the only one who didn't get sick. And at the very last supper, which was in the coffee shop of an expensive Delhi hotel, one of the wives came over to me and she looked at the beer bottle on my table and said, "You're the only one among us who didn't get sick. And I notice you are the one who drinks beer all the time. Is there some connection?" So I said, "Sit down." And I explained all this that I had learned in the desert of Tunisia. And 8 months later, I got a letter in the mail from Brazil. And it was from this woman who had gone with her husband to one of Portland's sister cities in the middle of nowhere, Brazil. And she wanted to tell me with many explanation points that she and her husband had been there as guests of honor in the boondocks. And she drank beer every meal. And she was so excited to say that we never got sick. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I actually met her a couple of months ago.
She attended the talk.
Hmm?
She attended the talk.
Yeah, yeah. So we know for at least 5,000 years, this is one of my favorite cartoons, that yogurt, which is itself made from the good bacteria, can cure diarrhea because these good bacteria can do battle with the bad that caused it for us. And the proof of this is in a very historic, true story of how the alliance between the French Empire and the Ottoman Empire was cemented. It seems that the King of France was dying of diarrhea that nobody in his kingdom could cure. When he heard the news, Suleiman the Magnificent in Istanbul, the Ottoman emperor, immediately shipped gallons of fresh Turkish yogurt to France, and this magically cured the king. I can also speak to this because back in the 70s, I went with 3 New Yorkers to Rio de Janeiro, where one of them got sick. And I said, go eat yogurt twice a day. And in 2 days, he was astonished to be absolutely fine. Sometimes medical people will tell you to eat apples or applesauce, thinking that the pectin in them will work, but nothing works better than real yogurt, not with the sugar or anything in it, just the pure yogurt. And you need to see on the package that it contains those 2 bacteria that are what create yogurt. The sugar that's poured into most yogurts will kill that bacteria. So you don't want to use that. Western science is now discovering that cinnamon is antibiotic. You will find bulletins on the internet saying use cinnamon against salmonella and E. coli. Cinnamon does have the right stuff. Do you know why? Because it's the bark of a tropical tree. And that tree, if it wants to survive in the heat of Sri Lanka, has to put into that bark chemicals that are going to kill any of the ants or boring insects that try to invade it. So eating cinnamon makes those chemicals in its essential oils that will kill those bad things available to us. Now that's the real Ceylon cinnamon, not the cassia coming to you from Mexico. When I gave a talk on spices last time, we talked about the search for black pepper and why it was so important and why Columbus discovered America, because he was sent to find this important black pepper. Well, the reason is because those little black peppercorns in your grinder at home are antibiotic. And they have another thing that makes them very valuable. In digestion, they encourage the production of hydrochloric acid, which, as it happens, is the main component of your gastric acid, which is what breaks down and helps you digest your food. And so the desperate search of Columbus to get pepper faster and cheaper had a medical motivation. Pepper made that awful meat of this 15th, 16th centuries easier for people to digest, and it killed some of the bacteria that was in it. Today, we don't need it to do that, and we don't think it's very important. But to people for hundreds of years, it was the most important thing you could have medicinally in your kitchen. The NIH bulletins lately are telling you garlic will kill bad bacteria. I hate to say this, but they're about 5,000 years late to this game. Ancient people have known it for a long time, and they would praise garlic in ancient texts because it had the magical power over what they would call evil spirits. Now, what were they talking about? Well, you may have noticed yourself, if you cook or you eat, that if you cut it, garlic has an awful smell, right? And if you eat it, you get that smell on your breath. And there's an old joke, that's what they call Italian birth control, just eat a lot of garlic. And so what is that awful smell? And it's on your breath and it's in the garlic. It's sulfur. There's sulfur in garlic. And the message that garlic is full of sulfur, and sulfur can wipe out bacteria. And what the ancients thought of as evil spirits were whatever bacteria they could not see, viruses they could not see, that made people cough and shake and lose their breath or breathe out foul smells. And so we notice that garlic actually goes right into your lungs. It is one food that does not go into your digestive system, and that's why the smell is on your breath. Garlic goes directly into your lungs, and and that is where it can wipe out viruses and bacteria that are affecting your lungs, which is why they called it the remover of evil demons, because people stop coughing and choking and jumping around from it. It is said that Mohammed himself forbid Muslims to enter a mosque if they had eaten garlic because it smelled so bad. And there are signs that still hang on Zen monasteries in Japan that say no fish or garlic allowed within. And again, the reason is it is an effective antiviral antibiotic. In the body, it goes right into your bloodstream and into your lungs. And that is why it is still smelly on your breath. But it works like a vacuum cleaner, and it does work. And there is another antibiotic probably in your kitchen right now, and maybe you don't even know how valuable it is. During the killing fields of World War I, there was a British physician tasked with doing triage on all the bodies that were left on the plains of Greece. He was to save as many of these wounded soldiers as he could, but he was quite frustrated because he quickly ran out of ointments and whatever he had to heal them. But he was in Greece, actually on the Attica plain that surrounds Delphi. This is the home of the great oracle of Delphi, a place of worship for thousands of years. And in all those temples at Delphi and all over the plains, there was fresh honey, and there were bees and beehives. And so this physician reasoned there has to be some reason for all these temples and this oracle and this sacredness near all this honey. Just as there has to be a reason the bees are working so hard to produce and use it. And he had a hunch, and of course he was desperate. So he raided the beehives and he began slathering the honey, which is still today marketed as Attiki honey from the plains of Attica, on the wounds of every British soldier he found that still had life in him. And the next day, when he went back, he noticed that none of the wounds slathered with honey became infected, and those soldiers were still alive. And a homespun antibiotic was born. Maybe you had a sore throat and somebody gave you hot water with lemon and honey, or you had cough drops. You open it and the honey goes down your throat. It is thought that the early Greeks already knew the value of honey medicinally, which is why they erected so many temples among the beehives around Delphi. And there is another thing I said last week that I just learned about. If you have an allergy cough, as I did from hay fever, you are responding to the local goldenrod. And I was told not to eat my Attiki honey, but to buy local Maine honey that the bees were using the pollen of the goldenrod to make. And that becomes homeopathic for you and can cure your coughs or distress from the local pollen if you eat honey made from bees using the local pollen. People also feed fenugreek. Fenugreek is a seed to new mothers to help with their milk, because fenugreek has been known for 1,000 years to have some chemical that encourages the body's liquids to flow. And I believe midwives are now doing that here. In Nepal, people make a soup of fenugreek and mung bean to promote strength in an invalid. And in Cairo, Egypt, fenugreek is still used under the name of helba. It's an Egyptian preparation. They soak the seeds in water until they swell into a thick paste. And this is said to be equal to quinine in preventing fevers if you rub it on the fevered person. And it is comforting to the stomach, and they use it in Egypt against diabetes. The seed is also used in Ethiopia as a natural herbal medicine for the treatment of diabetes. And now American researchers are discovering that in addition to stabilizing diabetes, fenugreek can lower your bad cholesterol and reduce inflammation. And for women, it can increase the estrogen level of your body. The Newari people, who are the original inhabitants of the city of Kathmandu, have a very medicinal way of eating. They make a special dish called kuwati. In their language, kwa means hot and ti means something liquid or drinkable, like a soup. And kuwati is often made for new mothers just after they gave birth. It is given to the frail and the invalid, and then it is celebrated by everyone on the full moon day that is closest to the end of the long monsoon season. It is to revitalize your body that has struggled through the monsoon. And there is actually a day on the Nepali calendar known as Kuwati Day. And the soup, you eat it on that day at the end of the monsoon. And it is composed of 9 different lentils and beans, which traditionally were first sprouted because that more quickly released their energy. The sprout shows you there's energy. And a Nepali scholar says of this soup, it rejuvenates the body tired from the strenuous work of planting rice. Modern nutrition experts agree the fibers and antioxidants in those beans can build immunity from the coming winter's many diseases. And the spicy ingredients used in this soup, that would be garlic and ginger, have the power to make us sweat, removing the body's excesses, and they can clean out our lungs. The heat warms us from inside after we are soaked through the long monsoon, which most people used to spend outdoors in the field. Since few fresh beans are available to us in the winter, eating kuwati signals the beginning of long months of gaining nutrition now from preserved food. And few things are more nutritious than a combination of beans, each rich in protein. To cure a cough or a raspy throat, the Newari people will make you a tea from these ingredients in their pantry. Ajwan, which is a seed that thins excretions to smooth digestion and breaks your cough. It is in the dill and caraway family. Jimbu is a sage-like parsley plant that you can use parsley to put in vitamin A. Garlic cleans your lungs. Ginger raises your body temperature and gets things flowing so the bad moves along. Turmeric root is antibiotic. And the fenugreek, its mucilage will coat your stomach and throat lining and make the coughing move away, and it will soothe your inflammation. Cumin seed stimulates your digestive enzymes and detoxes your liver. Salt retains your water and kills any bad bacteria. And those black peppercorns are antibiotic and give you the hydrochloric acid to digest. And they will boil these together in water until it goes down by half, strain it and drink it. And I can tell you that it tastes a lot more pleasant than the Chinese herbal concoctions you can find. And it does actually make you feel better. Now, combining these ingredients in one pot might be thought of as a recipe, and that's our word for combining foods into a unity or a dish. And as I said, where did that word come from? It came from those first wellness spas the Crusaders created because they would mix together different ingredients into a dish, and then they would offer that to a guest, a spa guest, and they would use the active Latin word, receive this. And the active Latin word receive this is recipe, recipe. And that word became conflated with the dish that was being made. Unless you think it still isn't at work, as I said, we have RX, and it is recipe or recipe. And so before we close, let's go back to drinking. And let's remember, in the Deep South, more than a century ago, keen observers noticed that plantation slaves were chewing what's called the cola nut to give them energy while they worked. And at the same time, indigenous workers from south of the border were chewing a leaf to give them energy. It was, of course, the coca leaf. And so a canny pharmacist in Georgia combined this cola nut rich in caffeine with this coca leaf that was stimulating into a new energy tonic, which he marketed under a brand name that contained both ingredients, Coca-Cola. Today, it is just sugar and water and food coloring, but the original was the cola nut and the coca leaf. Closer to home, we still have Moxie, made from the gentian root, and originally it was marketed as a nerve tonic. And we also know that to power up now, athletes gorge on carbs before an event. And we give people we love foods like chocolate that will spike those feel-good endorphins. And we also have what we call comfort food, right? And when you want to combat the blues or soothe your fears or power your memory, you'll make something or go buy something that to you is comfort food. And it works like Valium. For many people, comfort food are the dishes of their childhood. Maybe nobody's looking, you eat peanut butter on an English muffin or mashed potatoes or a dish of applesauce when you feel blue and that's what you want. For some people, it's a roast chicken, it's chicken noodle soup. As I said, early in the pandemic, the journalist noted that most people were no longer eating fancy food. They were looking for comfort food, and restaurants had to adjust their menus because people were just feeling nervous and that's what they wanted. About 2,500 years before Michio Kushi came up with his macrobiotics, an Indian religious text called the Abhidharma, which is still being used today, began with these words, "All beings exist on food." And the authors then insisted this is why it was crucial for us to understand how our food works. Without knowing or having an X-ray machine or an MRI, the Abhidharma was able to explain the metabolic process that is breaking down every ingredient we ingest, how our digestive system rips it apart into various chemical elements that then individually act in diverse ways, going through the bloodstream, the kidneys, into the lungs, or through the intestine. And what it says is what Michio Kushi's lieutenant said 5,000 years later: if there is too much going one way, creating a dam, not enough going the other, creating an outage, too much that is chilling or burning, the body slackens, it weakens, it ceases to function because it is in dis-ease. This Eastern understanding that food controls the body has given us the impetus to understand food. In 1954, a local doctor told a Western scholar who was studying science in China, experts at curing diseases are inferior to specialists who warn against diseases. Experts in the use of medicine are inferior to those who recommend a proper diet. In 1982, Madhur Jaffrey, who was recruited to become the Julia Child of Indian cooking, wrote in her book, Indian Cooking, published in the United States, "There is something so very satisfying about Indian cookery. Perhaps it is the unique blending of herbs and spices and seasonings, as well as meat and pulses and yogurt and relishes, that my ancestors determined centuries ago would not only titillate our palate, but it would preserve our health and the proper chemistry balance of our bodies. Chinese medicine, with its emphasis on balancing the qi, or the life force, also relies on various foods at various times for your gender, your age, or your geography, or last week what I called GPS. And those code words for that food are yin, cold, dark, thick, and yang, heat and light. And they're the main categories into which the Chinese will divide food to describe for you as an antidote when you have dis-ease. Healers, whether they're herbalists or doctors, will recommend Asian pears and lily buds for a winter cough, bone marrow soup for a broken toe or a hip replacement, tofu to get your estrogen replacement, broccoli to get your estrogen replacement. Medical knowledge of foodstuffs is passed down through families from cook to cook. And a hostess or a mother who is serving you lotus root knows she is giving you purifying toxins that will build up in your blood and cleansing them. The overriding idea about all food in China, the scholar Casey Chan explained in his pioneering work many years ago, Food in Chinese Culture, it is that the kind and amount of food one takes is intimately relevant to one's health. Food not only affects health as a matter of general principle, but the selection of the right food at the particular time must be dependent on your health condition at the time. Therefore, food is medicine. Ayurveda, which is the traditional Indian medical practice, literally means the science of life. And it is at least 5,000 years old and still the Indian subcontinent's main form of healthcare. And we have practitioners right here in Maine, so it's very much alive for us. And Ayurveda's modern practitioners are horrified by our endless obsession with diets, low carb, no carb, just juice, strictly protein, whatever, because they believe every individual is a unique organism. And so an Ayurvedic healer, as one of them says on the internet, has to design an individual diet based for you on factors like age and gender, the strength of your tissues and digestive system, the level of toxins in your body, and your body's tendencies. Geography and seasons should also influence your diet choices, along with foods that will affect your mental clarity, emotional serenity, and sensual balance. Those foods would be almonds, rice, honey, sweet fruits, mung beans, seasonal vegetables, and leafy greens, because they help coordinate your body, your mind, and your heart. So according to the Indian observation that gave birth to this idea that there is a science of life, life is energy plus matter. And as you know, the study of energy and matter, we study that too. And what do we call that? The study of energy and matter. It's physics, right? Study of physical properties of energy and matter. Also, from the Greek, we use the word physic, sometimes to describe something medicinal or a medical exam. It is a physical. And we use that word because in Greek, the word for the knowledge of nature is physiouki. And therefore, someone who has that knowledge of nature, which is the knowledge of matter and energy, is a physicist, but also a physician, matter and energy. And so there is the same root for both words. And how are they connected? A physicist is dealing with the properties of energy and matter in the universe all around us. A physician, who we call a doctor, is dealing with the properties of energy and matter inside our body. A physicist looks at the big universal picture. A physician at a reduced snapshot of the universe as our body. Quark is an elusive particle. but it is also a soft white German cheese. And thus, a physician's expertise has always been understanding the energy properties of edible matter. What foods components or noticeable effects were on the body, or how they would break down in our metabolic furnace of the stomach, and what would happen next. In other words, energy from matter. And because we attribute our Western medical system to the Greeks, and we like to think it started with Hippocrates, let's look at his famous oath that all physicians are required to take. That oath is the earliest expression of medical ethics in our Western world, and it established principles that are still inviolate today. But unfortunately, in our speed-stricken world, the modern version of that old oath that graduating physicians must swear to today has been significantly abridged. And what we Americans have chosen to delete from that oath is very revealing. Here is a sentence that used to be at the start of the oath, but has now been deleted. I will apply dietetic measures for the benefit of the sick, according to my ability and judgment. I will keep the sick from harm and injustice. I think the English translation of that sentence is eat and be well.